well, it's not as black and white as simply just, okay, look at their skin color and place them in a race. This is my first YouTube video officially. My name is Nickay from the Pink Ravyn. I've been writing a blog for about 5 years, 7 years, I guess. I think I started the blog when I was in college, early part of college, and I've always wanted to do a YouTube video. Now, the problem was I'm very shy in front of the camera, so this is my first time in front of the camera officially. Sorry if my focus is everywhere other than on the camera because this is my first time. Okay, so a little bit about the Pink Ravyn. So the reason why I came up with the Pink Ravyn is mainly because I actually love ravens. That's my favorite bird. One of the reasons why is because they're one of the most intelligent birds out there right now. They have a very good way of communicating. They can make friends very easily. They're very social. And I mean, they're black, which is one of my favorite colors, as well as pink, why I have the word pink in my official branding. So the main focus of the Pink Ravyn is to just share my love for writing and art and design. And so if you check out my blog, which is supposed to be in the link below, you'll see a whole set of, writing tips, writing content, my own writing, and some of the books that I've written already. Okay, so one of the things that I have written that I don't think I see a lot on the internet or on YouTube is mainly for authors like myself who struggle to find actual good books that describe dark skin tones really well. As a black writer, I think that's one of the most important things to me, is to be able to describe skin tones. So that's kind of one of the things that I want to start off with in this YouTube video. So let's dive right into it. Let's start off with the first thing, which is just basically an overview of what describing skin tone really means. If you see me looking down, that's because I have my computer right in front of me and I'm trying to read from it to see how, well, I can't do this. Okay, so the first thing that I believe is the most important thing is just understanding what race is. So let's say, for example, we know the two major races, which is white versus black, but it's a little bit more vague and at the same time deeper than just white versus black or Asian versus Indian, or what we kind of very used to, right? The Merriam-Webster dictionary describes race as a family, tribe, people, or nation belonging to the same stock or a class or kind of people unified by shared interests, habits, and characteristics. I think that the second definition is more geared towards ethnicity in terms of, having the same habits, having the same interests. That's more like a cultural definition. And I don't think that's a good way to describe race, because people can have very different genetic backgrounds and still have very similar interests and very similar habits. The Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy actually has I think a more in-depth definition for race. So it states that race is the foundation that generates discrete racial groupings based on biological similarities. For example, these similarities can be defined with similar genes, similar structures, similar skin tones. That's basically what I would view race to be. For example, if you think of the Asian race, for quick reference, especially Eastern Asia or Northeastern Asia, where we have China, Japan, North Korea, South Korea, you would see that they have very similar structure, very similar look to them. Obviously, they're all still different. Okay, no two people look alike, or no two culture ever like looks alike, but you could see a similarity between all of those different ethnic groups, and that's what we would classify as a race. So it's the same thing with European or the Caucasian race. There are similarities that they share among themselves. For example, there's a similarity between an Irish person and an Italian person, even though they're not from the same ethnic background. And that's the same thing with Black people. There's a similarity between a Jamaican, a African American, a Nigerian. Though they're not exactly the same, you can see some similarities within their structure or their physiological structure. So most scholars actually agree that race isn't something that you could actually just test for or test the DNA for to see, okay, they belong to this exact race. What a scientist would actually test for is probably some genetic traits that may be very similar to what they would consider a race to be having. So for example, if an archaeologist digs up a person about, let's say, hundreds of thousands of years ago and find that they have blue eyes, then the logical thing they would come to the conclusion with is that this person may be a Caucasian. However, it's not necessary for a Caucasian to always have blue eyes, and not all blue-eyed people are Caucasian. So we can't really test to see which race a person belongs to. A significant portion of how you would determine what a person's race is mainly social, or as you know, most people would like to say, it's a social construct, because we can't really just classify race based on just skin color or eye color, because obviously a dark skinned person, a person who could share the exact same complexion as me, could be Indian or could be Asian or even Caucasian. You know, it's not as black and white as simply just, okay, look at their skin color and place them in a race. And that's why I firmly believe for writing, we can't just use a race to describe a person. You can't just write, okay, this person is Asian, and expect us to know how that looks, because Asians come in various different shapes, various different sizes. Same thing with Black people, same thing with white people. We're not all the same. So that's why I like to focus more on describing the person rather than describing the race of the person, because especially books authored by white people, they tend to have a habit of, whenever a Black person is going to be in the book, they just describe them as vague as African American. And it's, to me, not the best way to describe a person, because to tell me someone is African American is just telling me their cultural or ethnic background. That's not really telling me how to envision them. So my philosophy is, if you want to include diversity in your book, you have to go beyond just stating the person's race. And this is especially helpful if you write fantasy, because if you're a fantasy writer, then it's even more difficult than to just say, okay, Asian or Indian or Black, because obviously if you're creating a world, those constructs or those cultural ethnic differences wouldn't really be in your world. So in that first part, I practically hit on a lot of the stuff that I wanted to actually talk about. So I have 5 tips that I would like to share with you guys. Let's go with tip number 1. And tip number 1 is to understand how overtones and undertones work. Now, if you love makeup, I don't, but if you love makeup, then you would get this immediately. We could be the same complexion, but not have the same undertone or overtone. And although you don't have to write this in details in your book, to understand overtone and undertone could help you choose the correct words when describing a person. So for example, if you want to describe a person with warmer undertones, using metaphors like her skin, I messed up there. Her skin glowed like the sun, gives us, the reader, a better understanding that, okay, this person has a more warm complexion. Or you might say that this person's skin is glistening like moonlight. Then you're giving us, the reader, a vision that this person may have a cooler complexion. So understanding how overtones and undertones work is very useful to basically describe your character in a way that the reader would, okay, envision a person who is closer to what you want than to, just vaguely throw out there a color, which you shouldn't do. I don't think that's the best way to describe a character, is just throw out a color, but still weaving it into the story and getting the readers to envision something or someone is one of the ways understanding how an undertone or an overtone would work. And I have this in details in my blog, which, like I said, I will link below. You can check it out and you'll get to see exactly what I mean about cool and warm undertones. I'm not going to spend too much time on tip 2, which I've already spent quite a lot of time on before, but basically it's just realizing that ethnicity is more than complexion. So like I said before, a person can have an ethnic background that does not reflect their race, or race that does not reflect their ethnicity. A good example of that is where I'm from in Jamaica. We have a lot of white or Caucasian Jamaicans. Ethnic background or cultural background is Jamaican, but if you see them, you will never know or never think to believe that they're Jamaicans, but they are. You have to understand that you can't just use an ethnicity or a nationality to identify someone's race. That's not going to work. That's a little bit stereotypical, and some people might even consider it offensive. So you have to dig a little bit deeper than that. Okay, so speaking of stereotypes, tip 3 is to give room to individuality. And basically what that means is taking stereotypes and turning it on its head. I think that's one of the best ways to basically tell the reader who a person is without actually going into such long details trying to describe that person. So I'm going to read a passage for you that I wrote that basically depicts this. Okay, so let's start. He wasn't the tallest boy in his class. Surely Matt was about a few inches taller than him, but it wasn't Matt everyone had expected to be a champion whenever PE class came up. It was him. They always chose Daniel first whenever the PE teacher announced they were playing basketball. But he didn't like basketball. He was too clumsy to know how to use his limbs right. Every person who saw him asked if he wanted to be in the NBA, but Daniel wanted to be a physicist, probably work for NASA. Basically, I'm talking about Daniel, who is very tall, very awkward, but somehow everyone expects him to be this basketball player, even though Matt is a bit taller than him. And from that passage, you could immediately grasp that Daniel probably is black, because the stereotype that most people follow is that if you're tall and you're black, you must be the next Michael Jordan. And that's not true. So for Daniel, he's very annoyed with this stereotype. He wants to be a physicist. And if you're really good at writing, you could actually use this phrase alone and automatically the reader would know how to place Daniel, what Daniel looks like, without you even mentioning his skin color. And this is how giving room to individuality helps you as the writer to put diversity in your book without having to describe a person's complexion using literal colors. Okay, so if you're a fantasy writer like I am, all of this advice might be a little bit not helpful because maybe in your world they don't play basketball, or maybe there's just no stereotypes in your world. But I have found for my book, when I was working on my debut book, The Bloodlust Power, I found that using world building to help me really set in stone how I wanted people to view my characters. What I did was describe one particular character from being a part of a tribe, and then I would mix it up. Basically, I would say, okay, this character is from this tribe, but he looks nothing like the tribe he's from. For example, in my first book, The Bloodlust Power, Bry, he's a nightingale, but he doesn't look like a nightingale. Normally, nightingales are very dark, very almost like night colored, but he is more of a cellophane. He looks more light toned with reddish undertones, and based on that description alone, the reader would get that anyone who's from cellophane looks light in complexion versus a nightingale who looks darker. And Bry basically breaks that stereotype because he is a nightingale but he looks cellophane. You can use this to help you create a world where you're introducing diversity without having to state the obvious every time a particular character is mentioned. For example, with Bry, I already made that distinction very clear, so I don't need to keep mentioning that every time Bry comes up, because now we all know how Bry looks. We all know how nightingales are supposed to look, and we all know how cellophans are supposed to look. And I would only mention Bry because he is basically not following the basic stereotypes that I created in my world. So you could do something like that and create like a stereotype for your world, and then have a character break that so that it's more authentic to your book and it shows diversity in your book as well. Last tip number 5, is to choose the right words for skin tones and types. And when I say choose the right words, I don't mean choose words that are literal. I mean choose words that are connotative. So let's use this example. If you described a character's skin tone as pearlescent, then I would envision the person's skin tone to be very light, glistening, kind of like Edward in from Twilight, but not exactly, more like glistening, more bright, more vivid. Whereas if you said something like linen, I would kind of think clean, polished, a little bit natural, no makeup, anything like that. Versus if we said alabaster, which would be smooth, a little bit chalky, kind of like porcelain. So all of those colors that, or all of those words that I just used, is basically describing someone with a very light complexion. But obviously not just their complexion is being taken into consideration, but the texture of their skin or even personality is also being taken into consideration, because that's how you would want to describe your character. You don't want to just place complexion on them and leave them. You want to give them some sort of characteristic, some sort of personality in your description, so that when the reader reads that, they learn more about your character, versus then you just saying, okay, their skin was light, or their skin was just this, or just not using words that fit the personality of your character. So thank you guys for watching. If you want to know more about me and read some more of my blogs, you can visit me at the Pink Ravyn Writes.wordpress.com, like I said. I'll be linking that in the description below for you to find it. I hope to produce more YouTube videos like this, more writing tips, more, day in the life videos. This was my first time, so please cut me some slack. And until next time, have a wonderful day. Thank you.